don't belong in heaven. We believe that in Science of Mind that heaven is a state of mind, and we're all here, that we're all one, and there is no time and space. And so we take this moment of silence just to remember those that have passed over. We bless them. We give gratitude for the life and joy that they brought. And we bless this planet to learn from their sacrifice that we do find a way forward. We cut through the hate, we cut through the violence, we cut through war, and we find that natural love and unity that is a part of who we are. And so it is. You know, that this week I turned on the news and I was surprised, well, not really, and I was saddened mostly to see coverage of another school shooting, this time in Uvalde, Texas. 19 children, 2 adults, and the shooter were all dead. The shooter was a suffering 18-year-old who had failed to graduate high school. His angry calls for help and love were not recognized for the level of desperation that he felt for several years. The assault rifle and pistol were purchased legally, in a country that chooses to live in fear and defend itself with millions of firearms rather than deal with the true ills of our social framework. Even the local police were afraid to confront the young man in combat protective gear and with his AK-15 assault rifle. I sat stunned. Sadness and grief just washed over me. I recalled the first time that I felt such sadness over a school shooting. Columbine High School, 1999. It's a newer high school that was near the high school that I went to in Colorado. And it had been created out of that school. And so some of my classmates had children at that high school during that event. And so there were 12 students and a teacher killed. And with all that pain and suffering of the surviving families felt close at hand to me. This wasn't some distant happening. It was happening to me and my friends, people I cared about. No, the Columbine High School massacre cut deep into my own soul. My heart was broken. And it happens again each time that we hear about another shooting. Sandy Hook Elementary, Parkland High School, a Buffalo supermarket, Uvalde, and many more. According to NPR, there have been 212 mass shootings where 4 or more people were shot in the United States so far in 2022. 27 of those shootings have been at schools. The Pew Research Center reported that of the 45,222 gun-related murders in the U.S. in 2020, 54% were suicides, 43% were murders. Only 611, or less than 2% of those 2020 gun-related deaths were part of the mass shootings, according to Gun Violent Action. We're all saddened and we grieve for those souls lost in Uvalde. But what about all these other lives that have been cut short by gun violence? And through the war in Ukraine and elsewhere on our planet, all of the soldiers that we memorialize here on Memorial Day weekend, right? J. Van Bavel, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University, was quoted in a recent USA Today article. He said, "It's easier to mobilize anger and hope, but anger dissipates and hope wanes. Grief is paralyzing." It's easy to be paralyzed by the deep sadness and grief, our low tide of emotions, and lock those in with a sense of helplessness, hopelessness, and despair, depression. Right? The current mental health epidemic among young people reveals that pervasiveness of those feelings in our society. Gun control advocates have developed learned helplessness, After the repeated pattern of enthusiasm for gun control after Columbine High School, but it ended with no legislation. It happened again after Sandy Hook Elementary and after the Orlando nightclub massacre. Again and again. Learned helplessness. How do we find our way to the high tide of hope again? How do we change this pattern? Well, it begins by allowing that wave of emotions to wash over us and pass. We allow divine love and compassion for ourselves and for others to fill our hearts and comfort our hurting souls. Love is the soothing and healing balm. And then, when we have found ourselves on dry land again, we can choose to follow Spirit's call to be a presence for love and healing. When we remember that we are all part of that one life that is God, we can set our intention, a new intention, to change the repeating pattern of inaction and allow the power and the presence of universal Spirit to create a new world in us and through us and as all people. Together we can make a stand for a world fueled by love and compassion rather than by hate and fear. So today, let's talk a little bit more about how we move from low tide to high tide. You know, sadness, we have a slide for that, I think. Sadness is a primary emotion that we all feel at some time or another. You know, when we're sad, we seem down in melancholy. Our heart hurts. Our face shows it. And when we experience grief, it feels like the situation is beyond our control. With grief comes loss and an extreme sense of distress and sorrow. In the book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz says, all the sadness and drama you have lived in your life was rooted in making assumptions and taking things personally. Our whole dream of hell is based on that. So, what are the causes for sadness? Some are simpler. Things don't go our way. We don't get our heart's desire. We all know children, when they don't get that special toy they wanted, or we can remember ourselves doing that. They'll throw a tantrum and be very sad and teary-eyed. When we're older, it's when we don't get the new job we wanted, or maybe an effort fails that we put a lot of energy into, right? It can also be a more devastating loss, a relationship that ends, a love interest, or a dear friend. We lose a job. It could be grief because we've lost a loved one, parent, spouse, or child. You know, country music thrives on all of that loss that it sings about. And there is also trauma, such as an accident, murdering the children. Could be a physical loss, the ability to walk or to see. COVID has kept us locked down for 2 years and more, and we still have limitations and fear. But it's not just our own trauma. You know, one of the most touching stories of the week has been the husband of one of the Uvalde teachers. 2 days after the tragedy, he had just gone to the school to put flowers on the memorial that they had there. And when he got home, his family was there, and he had a heart attack and passed away. He died of a broken heart. It was too much. Right? So as we go through our grief and our sadness, we can get locked into that downward cycle and just turns further and further inward. Our world gets smaller and smaller, and the lack of control leads to despair. When we become depressed, we withdraw. You know, there's that trio of guilt and blame and shame that it's kind of a vicious circle that keeps us focused inward and feeling responsible. You know, we need to learn to forgive ourselves and make amends if appropriate. Forgiveness is important. You know, we've all heard of survivor's guilt. It's very real. In Columbine, there was one student who was on the second floor, nowhere close to any of the things that happened at the time. They just heard about it and mourned the loss of their friends. But 2 years later, one of those students committed suicide. Just knowing this, feeling responsible that I should have been there, I should have saved somebody. So how do we move from low tide to high tide? The key is to be fully present, to be gentle and compassionate with ourselves and with others, and to forgive ourselves. Scott Aubrey says, I am in touch with any sadness that may be resident in my heart. I have the courage to let myself feel it. If we keep it locked up, it's just going to stay there locked up, and the shell gets stronger and stronger. And so we have to have the courage to look at it and feel it and be present. Richard Rohr, in his book Falling Upward, says, inability or refusal to feel their deep sadness takes the form of aimless anger. To get to the bottom of their anger is to face the ocean of sadness underneath it. An ocean of sadness. When we stuff our feelings, they fester, and it becomes anger or depression. It gets locked in, and our bodies embody those feelings. And it comes out as a broken heart or an ache or a pain or an illness. Our bodies, if we don't let those feelings out, they go within. They affect not only our psyche, but our very body and soul. And so we need to find a place of love and compassion for ourselves and for others. One of the things that in our society that I would like to see change is the saying, big boys don't cry. Well, yes, they do. One of the most admirable qualities of my husband is that he is willing to cry and share his feelings, to live his feelings. We have to be easy and gentle with ourselves and allow glimmers of hope and love to peek through. And maybe that glimmer becomes a light to bring us forward. Love is the healing balm. The love language can be very different for different people. Perhaps it's talking with a friend or a loved one for a while they listen and let us empty out our pain. Perhaps it's some who simply holds us or rubs our back. For some, it's a solo walk on the beach or in the woods, listening to the sounds of nature. The trees, the water, the birds, chipmunks, and the bears all have great healing powers as we watch them, listen to them, be present. Perhaps for some people it's sinking into a great piece of music or literature, making art, perhaps a bubble bath or a massage. Whatever brings peace to you, to your body and soul, but let the feelings flow and do not give up on living. I love this book of joy. It was written after an April 2015 meeting when Desmond Tutu came to visit the Dalai Lama for his 80th birthday at his home in Dharamsala, India. And the question for the 5-day meeting was, how do we find joy in the face of life's inevitable suffering? Right? And so there's a man named Joseph Forgest that they quoted, and he talks about the benefits of sadness. People, he's a psychologist, and he says when people are sad, they're more focused. Depression collapses our circle of concern, while sadness may widen it. Right? So the grief is focused inward, and the sadness, we join with other people to work through that sadness, to let it out. Right? And that is what the Archbishop noticed, is that it's important to reach out to others in support and solidarity. Joy and sorrow can fasten together when we are united. Hedonic happiness is the kind of happiness that only allows positive states. I have to feel good all of the time. I just ignore all of these feelings. Well, no. That you can't banish those negative feelings like sadness just to exile. That's a spiritual bypass. They're a part of life. They're a part of what gives us our strength. Eudaimonic happiness is deeper and longer lasting. It's characterized by self-understanding, meaning and growth, and acceptance of including life sufferings, sadness, and grief. We're all going to pass at some point in time. We're all going to lose someone at some point in time. So how do we heal the sadness and grief? Well, we focus on the loved one that was lost instead of mostly on ourselves. In the reading, the Dalai Lama talked about if you continually ask yourself, what am I going to do now? And how can I cope? Woe is me. When we're really sad for ourselves, a kind of a selfish sadness. That's the path that leads us deeper into despair and depression. But coming together, letting it out, experiencing it is what grows us and connects us with spirit and each other. There's a famous Buddhist story the Dalai Lama tells, and it's about a woman whose child died. Her grief was inconsolable, and she carried her dead child with her throughout the land, went to everyone asking, can you heal my child? And she came to the Buddha and asked him to help her. Buddha told her that he would help her if she would collect mustard seeds for the medicine. Oh, yes, yes, she agreed quickly. And then Buddha explained that the mustard seeds must come from a house that has known no death. So the woman visited each house in the land in search of the seeds that might heal her son. But she discovered that there was no house that had not suffered the loss of a parent or a spouse or a child. And seeing that her grief was not unique, she was able to bury her child in the forest and release her grief. Grief and loss are a part of life. In the reading this morning, Dalai Lama talked about his main teacher that died, and he was, this person had been his rock while he went through all of his training and ordination. And he said, the way through the sadness and grief that comes from great loss is to use it as motivation and generate a deeper sense of purpose. One can live an even more meaningful life. And he had. There's a psychic named James von Prague, and I don't make a habit of going to visit people like this in big groups. I went to this evening. It was in 2019, and there was 250 people that were there to listen to him talk about, and a few people were going to get called out, and someone in the audience about few select people, and talk to their loved ones on the other side. But for some reason or other, I just felt like I had to go. And so when I was there, my deceased mother was one of the souls that came. She had died about 7 years before, I guess. And I didn't recognize her at first because as he described the woman, she was frail in a wheelchair. She had red hair. She dyed her hair at the end. She loved it. She was 89. And this is how she was just before she died. That's how she thought I would recognize her. But I remember her as much younger and vivacious and all the things that she did. But when she did come, she was determined to tell me how proud she was that I had graduated ministerial school and that I was coming here to CSL Tahoe-Truckee. That had always been her dream for me. Even before I decided to go to ministerial school when she died. But she knew. She really knew up there. And so we didn't always get along because she was always so stubborn and independent. Now, my mother has 2 daughters who are both stubborn and independent. And I wonder why, right? But she loved me. And she was proud of how I had carried out our family's values and beliefs, right? I was living part of her dream and her dream for our family. Sue Morter in the book, The Energy Code, says, if we can start to think of emotions as energies, as effects to anchor or expand, we won't be afraid of sadness. There's many American stories about taking action after sadness. One that I've always thought of is the organization MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It was started in 1980 by Candy Lightner after her daughter was killed by a drunk driver. Within 3 years, MAD had over 2 million members. Their efforts led to increased penalties in each state for drunk driving. A national law was signed by then-President Ronald Reagan to increase the national minimum drinking age to 21. Right? She made a difference for her daughter. Gabby Giffords, in July 2022, there's a documentary coming out called Gabby Giffords Won't Back Down. It covers the extraordinary recovery of this former congresswoman who was Gabby Giffords from an assassination attempt in 2011 that left her partially paralyzed and with a speech impairment. But she can walk now, and she can speak slowly, but understandably. Her determination is still there. She now fights for gun control in the organization that she has founded with her husband, Mark Kelly. It's called Giffords now. And her husband is a former astronaut and current U.S. Senator from Arizona, running for re-election. The Parkland High School 2018 school survivors from that shooting there, they founded a gun violence activist group called March for Our Lives. And since then, Florida Republican legislators, were able to come together and pass gun control legislation. Congress has yet to do so. But March for Our Lives is sponsoring a national day to protest in support of national legislation on June 11th, everywhere. And so hopefully we can find someplace here locally that we can support that. You know, maybe Buffalo and Uvalde are the latest tragedies that can spur us to action, right? You know, Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway have all passed gun restriction laws. They had a culture of gun ownership, but after those laws were passed, their gun violence statistics for mass killings, homicides, and suicide have all dropped dramatically. Right? It can be done. Amanda Gorman, you probably remember the former teenage poet laureate. She read the wonderful poem on the inauguration day for Joe Biden. And she's written a new poem recently that she put out on Twitter. And it urged people to move beyond the mourning of the pandemic and this latest tragedy, to come together to create a new day. It's called New Day's Lyric, and I'm just going to read some excerpts from it. May this be the day we come together. Mourning, we come to mend. Withered, we come to weather. Torn, we come to tend. Battered, we come to better. Tethered by this year of yearning, we are learning that though we weren't ready for this, we have been readied by it. Steadily we vow that no matter how we are weighed down, we must always pave a way forward. This hope is our door, our portal. Even if we never get back to normal, someday we can venture beyond it, to leave the known and take the first steps. So let us not return to what was normal, but reach toward what is next. What was cursed, we will cure. What was plagued, we will prove pure. Where we tend to argue, we will try to agree. These fortunes we forswore, now the future we foresee. Where we weren't aware, we're now awake. In our hearts, once altogether beaten, now altogether beat. Come, look up with kindness yet, for even solace can be sourced from sorrow. We remember not just for the sake of yesterday, but to take on tomorrow. For wherever we come together, we will forever overcome. My first husband, Patrick, died after we had been together for 25 years. Our children were 12 and almost 8. My stepdaughter, Nicole, was 25. Pat had been battling both cancer and brain cancer for lung cancer for almost 5 years. He waited for Nicole to arrive after she had graduated college, and she came to the hospital to serenade him. She sang Landslide, one of his favorite songs that had been recorded by both Fleetwood Mac and the Dixie Chicks. He died just a few days later. I was sad and heartbroken. We all were. I did my best to get the kids fed and to school and do those things, and some days I just sat after they were gone. Some days my son refused to go to school. But they didn't, life wasn't easy. I was sad. My soulmate and life partner was gone. I was working part-time on contracts since I had put so much time and love into caring for my ailing husband and children. One girlfriend came over about a month after he passed, and she just held me while I cried and sobbed. Another girlfriend came over and did the dishes. There were no clean dishes or pots and pans to cook dinner. She didn't say a word. She just looked at that. I think it took her 2 or 3 hours. But that's what I needed. I had no energy left for anything else. I had to move through the grief so I could learn to live a new life without him. All of us were in therapy or grief counseling. I worked with a practitioner. We did not get through our sadness alone. Right? And little by little, the waves of sadness became shallower and further apart. I was able to resume working full-time after about 3.5 years. Life wasn't really normal for 5 years. As the 5-year anniversary approached, I could see a path forward that was new. There were things that I wanted to do and places I wanted to go that Patrick couldn't go. He wasn't willing to go. And then Michael Brandman and I got reacquainted, meeting at a professional conference. Michael's first wife had died from cancer a year earlier. It was instant kismet for Michael, but I was careful to take things slow. I'd been through a lot of pain. But we did quickly find out that our bucket lists overlapped by about 90%. Pretty good fit. So Michael stepped in and he helped me raise my 2 children who were living at home. I met his 5 sons, the youngest of whom was in college. They were mourning too. We worked to get my home repaired. I learned to laugh again. Michael had been a Christian Scientist since he was a teenager, but he was overjoyed to attend his first Center for Spiritual Living with me. What we believe fits his beliefs even better. You see, love is a soothing balm. I was healing. He was healing. And we created a new life together. At our wedding, we had a soloist sing a song called "You Loved Me Back to Life," as we smiled in each other's loving eyes. It's a song, one of my most cherished songs, although it's not in the wide repertoire of the world, but you loved me back to life. And that's what we can do for each other. And all of these losses that we have, we can make a stand together to let love and light heal our world, to make a stand, to change that pattern and allow that divine pattern that is always there within each and every heart and soul, and courageously step forward to create a new path, a new intention of life and more life. Let love be manifest in the world. Let's take this to prayer. And so in this stillness, our hearts aching, we sense that power and presence of the one life that is God, that is infinite love, infinite peace, infinite joy, that is unshakable through it all, that calls us forward, that reminds us that we are made of love. That is the divine essence of who we are. It is that beacon of light that calls us to step forward, to part the clouds and let that light and love reach our own hearts. And the sadness slowly melts. The healing balm of love does its work. And as we move through this process, we mourn all of the grief and loss in our lives, all the things that small and great. We mourn the soldiers that have died for our country to protect us. We honor them this Memorial Day weekend. We bless our loved ones that have been a part of our lives. And yes, we have the grief of loss, but we also have the wonderful memories of the love and the joy that we have shared together. And we are grateful. And we remember the essence of who we are, how we became something greater because we have known them. And we stand taller and listen to that inner voice of spirit within us, expressing itself in and through and as each one of us. And we see around us kindred souls that are also stepping up. And we gather hand in hand, arm in arm, and we move forward to change the world. We change our intention on the inside, and we allow universal spirit to manifest it everywhere, for that is how it works. We plant the seed, and God takes over. And we listen and do, each one of us, what is ours to do, what is ours to say, what is ours to not do, what is ours to start doing, what is ours to believe, what is ours to share. And so we see the little shifts happening. And what had been learned hopelessness is now replaced by confident and determined change, of willingness to act, a willingness to speak, a willingness to have the dawn of a new day. We feel it warming our hearts and souls. We feel it warming the whole planet. We feel it uniting everyone everywhere, regardless of what side of whatever conflict they are on. It is that one life, that one heart that beats in all of us as one. And so we find that inner peace. We find that inner unity that is now manifesting also on the outside. It is the dawn of a new day. We are grateful to see it and know it and experience it, that its day has come. We rejoice. We accept this as our truth, as the truth of the divine life that loves us all, that lives as all of us as one. And so we release these words, this hope now turned to a confident knowing to the law, which makes it so. And together we say, and so it is.